Hi, this is Sarah Dicky. It is about 2:25 on 10/25/2012. I'm here with Pat and Larry Paretta, and we're here to talk about Sterling Strauser. Larry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Larry Paretta, and this is my wife,
Pat Paretta.
And how do you both know Sterling, or how did you know Sterling?
We met Sterling about 15 years ago through some mutual friends, just as an occasion, well, this is Sterling Strauser. And we just struck a wonderful relationship. He liked the way I shook hands with him, and so he thought I was a great guy. And we enjoyed his work, and we purchased some of his paintings. And he had this, I wouldn't say it's a habit, but he had a unique thing about him that if you bought something and he liked you, he would give you what he called a green stamp. And his green stamps were just little doodlings that he did on a piece of masonite. And he had them in a drawer, in a desk drawer, and he'd pull out the drawer and he'd say, "Here, pick one." So I would pick one or two. Most of them were just splashes of color with a few marks on it that were sort of stylized pictures of nudes. One of them is a little chick, which we have here today. And that was a green stamp.
Yeah, it's just a little chick, and he used to make the legs and the wing and the beak. He just used the end of the brush to kind of define them outside of the yellow chick.
Right, just the handle of the brush. He would just kind of move the paint around, and he'd splash a little paint on, and then he would just make some outlines. But he was a lovely man. We really enjoyed being with him and seeing him and knowing him.
And how do you feel about his artwork? Like, what about his artwork drew you into it and made you want to purchase them?
I think I'll answer that.
Go ahead.
He was a self-taught painter, and I believe he worked at a boiler works or a...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and so it was his folk art, and he had many other pieces in the house by some of the famous artists in the area that were folk artists also. And it was his joy of painting, and he did it in such a relaxed manner. Sometimes we would go by their house when we were over near the hospital, and in the fall he would be sitting out there on a chair in front of his house painting the leaves and things, and it was just his total enjoyment of art and his art of showing you his work. And I think that one of the greatest things Larry loved was he always called Larry Kid. And the house was quite unusual. It was a small house, and in the kitchen they had their original enamel stove from the 40s, I think, and they cooked on it every day. And Dorothy, his wife, was a charmer. She was so sweet, but she always sat in the corner and deferred to Sterling. And she was quite an artist in her own work. I have quite a few of her watercolors. And I grew orchids at the time, and one time I brought a huge bouquet of orchids up from Florida, and she painted them for me. But she always didn't consider herself an artist like Sterling. But she also did hookings, which are done with wool. And
that's beautiful.
One of my favorites was she had done one of the two of them sitting on a park bench with a little dog walking by. And they were just a very unusual couple. You would meet them at art fairs, you'd meet them at church suppers, antique shows, and they loved to go to those things. And you could see they were totally, totally devoted to one another. And some of his artwork is so simplistic and yet has so much, it speaks so much to you that it's just capturing. And Larry and I have always liked art, and we were just totally enthralled with him and his work.
And now, So he was a fairly, when you first, were living up here, he was someone that was fairly well known, and
Yes.
and he was kind of everywhere. He was like the
Yes.
community.
You'd see him at dinner at JR's, you'd see him at churches, you'd see him all over the town. I think in their later years, I would say he probably was in his late 70s, early 80s, late 70s when we met him. And he had a very regal way about him. And at the time, we lived next door to our neighbor, Don Gibbons, who was also a very famous local artist. And we knew a lot of stories about Sterling through Don, and they did have an art council there back in the 70s. And Sterling and Don were good friends. So that's how we knew Sterling's reputation and his art accomplishments long before we had the opportunity to meet him.
And how do you feel about him, as a person outside of art? Like, how did you have a lot of contact with him outside of the art world, or?
We had a fair amount of contact with him socially, in that we would go to visit him sometimes at his home. One time in particular, it was a little chilly evening, and he used to wear this stocking cap. Literally, it was a stocking that with a knot tied in it that he pulled over his head to keep his head warm. And that's how we just enjoyed being with him. He was not a haughty person. He was a really down-to-earth, terrific man that loved what he was doing and liked it when people enjoyed what he was doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if socially they had a lot of friends, but whenever you went to his house, it was just, his face just lit up. And you could tell he was sincere about seeing people come to the door. And he'd say, "Well, kid, come on in." And he always liked Larry's handshake.
My handshake is
It was a strong handshake, and he thought that was a good man. So he had, and I did some baking for them once in a while when I had extra zucchini bread or pies or something. And whatever little thing you did for him was greatly, greatly appreciated. Because.
cherry pie.
And one time, it was in the summer, and I said, "Now, Sterling, I'm going to make you a pie. What kind is your favorite?" "Oh, I'll take anything," he said. But I said, "Well, cherry apple." "Well, I kind of have a hankering for a cherry pie." So I said, "Okay." So I made him a nice cherry pie with lattice work. And the next time we went to visit him, he had a painting of a slice of cherry pie. And I have that at home because I think when you have like my pictures of some orchids that Dorothy did for me in watercolor and the cherry pie and some of those things, they're such good memories because you look at them in the wall and you just think of what a happy, we were so privileged to have known him.
Yeah. And would you say that he pretty much drew all of his artwork from his everyday life, things that he experienced? What about the artwork you own? Is that mostly...
Yes.
Pretty much so. The cherry pie, of course, but he did a lot of sulkies, trotter sulkies, horse and sulky.
That was one of his signatures.
And that was one of his signature things. That he did some very large ones and some smaller ones, but he did an awful lot of them. And we have one of the more moderate-sized ones.
In the watermelon.
And yes, he did a slice of watermelon. And I think he would see something on his plate, and he would just paint it. Witness the cherry pie, but one time he must have had a piece of lemon meringue pie on his plate, and he decided to paint it. And we were over his home one night, and the painting was sitting on a chair, as where most of his things were just, I wouldn't say strewn around, but they were scattered around the house very informally. So I'm looking at this thing, it's sitting in a chair, and he says, "Larry, what do you think of my lemon meringue pie?" And I looked at it, and I said, "Sterling, it looks to me like a wheel of brie with a piece cut out of it." And he looked at it, and he said, "Well, I'll be darned, kid, that sure does look like that. It's upside down." But he was so impressed that it looked like a wheel of brie that he said, "I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll sign it." So he had signed it originally when he painted it.
Right side up.
Then he turned it over and he signed it again. And he said, now every 6 months you can turn the picture over and you have two. And so that's something we do. Every 6 months we take the picture and turn it upside down, and it goes from a wheel of brie to a slice of lemon meringue pie.
And it's quite known among our friends, because when they come over, a lot of them now want to turn it the other way.
To see what it looks like the other way.
One of my favorite pieces we have is a crate of strawberries, and it has on the end of the crate Hellers. Now Hellers was, as I remember, was out to 09, and it was a big truck farm, more or less, long before development on 209. And he apparently had gone out there and gotten a wooden crate of strawberries and brought it home and painted it. And it was just, they're so beautiful and so red, you just feel like you want to pluck one and
Bring
eat
it out of the painting.
Yeah, it's just, he did everything. And I have a little chick I'm sitting here showing Sarah, and you just want to cuddle the little chick. He's so cute and vibrant and a spunky little guy, and in a way that's the way Sterling was too.
Mm-hmm. And he loved his work and he loved doing what he was doing, but I was so impressed with that slice of pie that when I said it looked like a wheel of brie, he didn't say, oh, well, that's not what I... He looked at it and he saw what I saw, the picture having been upside down.
Yeah, he
and
wasn't...
he just readily agreed, and he was so happy that somebody saw something else in that painting besides what he originally...
Yeah, because some artists are like, well, no, this is this. But he was so willing to see...
He was willing to see the other
anything
side.
in it, yeah.
And so willing, in fact, that, as I say, he signed it the other way, and he said, now you have two.
And you have a very unique piece there.
It is very, very unique, yeah.
I hear that he was extremely influential to other artists. You said earlier that his house, he had a lot of other artwork from other artists there. Did you get to experience that at all, or know anyone that was inspired by him?
Well, Don Gibbons was. I know Don was a good friend and a neighbor for many, many years. Don was a sculptor and painter, but sculpture was really his first love, and a wonderful painter too. And Don was influenced. I know that when I first met Sterling and I said I was over to see him, and he gave me a green stamp, which happened to be one of those little nudes that Sterling does. Don said, I would kill to have one of Sterling's nudes. So he must have been impressed by Sterling.
Now, you said you knew his wife a little bit. Can you just tell me a little bit more about her? We haven't, most people don't speak about her. So.
I believe they had one daughter, and she was a tiny little person, and Sterling was a little bit more robust. Probably he could have been a perfect Santa Claus at some point, because he was so warm and kind. And she would just sit on a little straight back chair and pick up her little what did I say?
Sewing.
Whatever it was. Yeah. And hooking. And she was very quiet. And she really, whenever she was out for dinner, you would see her say, now Sterling. So she really was his support in all ways. But she was very talented as far as in her art. And she always did.
You can see from this that we had a number of
that's beautiful.
Of her works that are even more intricate than this. And I think you have one of her hookings, don't you?
I don't think I have a hooking.
You have one. In any event, we have a number of her things, and we carried on a correspondence with her over the years after Sterling passed away.
Until she passed away.
Because
we just fell in love with both of them, and I used to send them fruit, oranges in the wintertime, because, when you live in Florida in the winter and people are up here in the snow, and they didn't probably get out too much the last few years. So I would always send them oranges, and it was just so appreciated. And even after Sterling passed away and she moved down with a daughter, she would write me a nice note and thank me, always on her own note card. And at home, she used to do little note cards with her paintings, and I have quite a few of those at home also. But she never tried to be a star, or she was just always in the background with Sterling, and she just would let him be the star.
Just be his support.
Would let him be the star, yeah. She took a back seat to Sterling, and she was quite talented in her own right, and would have been famous had she asserted herself a little bit more, but she was content for Sterling to be the
Well, he was such a big personality.
yeah.
Had enough for both of them. What was I going to say?
None of his paintings were on the walls. It was always these.
They were like kind of stacked
They were
and
just-
leaning
just
against.
leaning on the couch. You'd have to move them to sit down.
Yeah.
And
As a matter of fact, I was going to sit down on that chair where the Wheel of Brie was. That's when
And that's how you noticed it.
That's when he asked me how I liked it.
And I can't remember without going up and doing a little reference work, but they were mostly all folk artists that were here in the 60s and 70s that were very famous around here. And he had a collection, and there was one artist that did kind of folk art, not sculpture, but little three-dimensional things, and he had some of those on the wall.
Okay.
And but he was, I'm certain he helped start a lot of the art in the
what I've
Strasbourg
heard.
area, because he was that kind of, he was so in love with art that I'm certain that he was one that helped start a lot.
Now you met him kind of later in his life.
Right.
Do you remember him, shortly before he passed? What was his spirits like? I hear that he was really just very positive and constantly happy.
I think the last time we saw him, he was having, I believe, a little heart problem. And he'd say, well, kid, you get older, kid, but he was never down. I never saw him where there wasn't this big smile and a warm hug for you. And he was just a super human being, I think Strasbourg area and the university is very lucky to get his works, because he is, in a way, he's a character, but he's such a lovable character that students in the arts or people in the surrounding area are going to be able to come and see his work and feel his person being there in his work.
But he was just so down to earth. Unlike a number of artists who really think that their work is on a par with Michelangelo or Leonardo, who just will not. It's a privilege for you to see it. For him, it was a privilege for you to see his work. And he just enjoyed, at least the impression that we got, was that he enjoyed so much us coming to see what he was doing.
That's is there anything else that I maybe should have asked you before we wrap this up?
I just wish he were alive today so we could all sit down and have a piece of cherry pie and talk some more about his love of art. And he was very proud of the fact that I think he came from a very humble background, that he had achieved so much on his own with no real formal training. And his style, I've never seen anyone else do oil on masonite board like he did. And he'd have big pieces of masonite in the corner, so I guess when he got an inspiration, he just hacked a piece off and started.
I mean, if he saw something, he would paint it, and he wouldn't waste any time. He would just...
Yeah, from what I understand, he'd come home from work and then paint till like 2 a.m. because he worked, full time for.
No, I did go to an exhibit once down. We did go down in Allentown, and he did have a dark period. I think in the 50s and 60s, his paintings were very large and very dark, dark street scenes, dark things like that. So maybe just when he retired, and I believe he was still working then, and maybe when he retired and really realized what a joy he was to himself, and he enjoyed life more, that he started with the whimsical subjects more. But we did see an exhibit, I would say probably in the early 2000s at the Allentown Museum, and it was, maybe you could get a copy of some of the retrospect pieces that were there, because it was really very interesting.
Excellent. Anything else?
No, that'll do it, outside the fact that I too miss him, and he was just a fun guy to me. And we always just enjoyed being with him.
We were lucky to have met him.
And we were lucky to have met him, and of course fortunate to have some of his work, which we cherish. Even the green stamps. Especially the green stamps.
Yes, you're very unique to have those, as I gather. Well, thank you so much for letting me talk to you about Sterling, and I'm gonna turn the recorder off.
Okay.